From the 1954 film There's No Business Like Show Business, that was Marilyn Monroe in her big production number, Heat Wave. Well, if you ever wanted to know when that film held its gala premiere and what Marilyn Monroe was doing on and off the set that day, or any day in 1954, 1955, and on, have I got the book for you. It's called Marilyn Monroe, A Day in the Life, and it's just that, a daily chronicle of events and activities in the life of Marilyn Monroe that is sure to impress even the most diehard Monroe fan who thinks they know everything. Well, the author of that book joins us today. She was last on this program a few years ago to talk about her book on Jane Mansfield called Puffblicity. April-Vevea Chambers, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, David.
And the last time you were on the program, you were just April-Vevea, so I think congratulations are in order.
Yes, no, I've gotten married and divorced once since then, and now I'm married again. But thank you. I very much appreciate it.
Well, I wanted to get into the story of how you discovered Marilyn Monroe and how you made that journey from being a young fan of Marilyn's films and then transitioning into becoming, as far as I'm concerned, one of the leading authorities on Marilyn Monroe.
So I would say I was probably about 16 years old. I had grown up with a lot of Shirley Temple and Betty Grable, and I knew who Marilyn was, but 16 was when I saw Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and I was dedicated to Marilyn research for a very, very long time. I actually got into Marilyn before I got into Jane. This is actually the second edition of the book, and I went through and I retooled that entire book. It was, I believe, like 170 pages, the first edition, and this one's almost 400. So it's very, very big, and there's just a lot of information in there, and it's through, I'm going to tell my age, but basically 16 years of research.
So a lot of people listening to this might be saying to themselves, my gosh, Marilyn Monroe's time was so long ago, the 40s and the 50s. How much research material could there be left out there? But you're saying there was enough to more than double the size of the original edition of this book.
Yeah, so I went through about 5,000 pages of sources, give or take a little bit. There was a lot of information, and I think a big thing that people don't realize when you're looking at Marilyn is just how complete her archive is, because the Strasbergs didn't let go of anything until 1999, so it was basically a time capsule. So we have everything that she held on to over her 36 years.
And you have, I don't think you'll mind me saying this, you have a bit of a reputation as kind of a myth buster when it comes to Marilyn Monroe. Were there any surprises for you, any debunking?
Yeah, so I think the big one is the Ella Fitzgerald story, because Ella Fitzgerald obviously has the whole quote about Marilyn, really helped her, and she owed her a real debt because she got her the job at the Macombo, and Marilyn was front row every night. And Marilyn wasn't front row every night because the Macombo was in Los Angeles, and Marilyn was firmly establishing herself in New York. We have pictures of her in New York. We have clippings of her in New York. She was definitely in New York, and she wasn't at the Macombo. But those famous pictures that everyone thinks are at the Macombo were actually at the Tiffany Club, which was several months before Ella's Macombo appearance.
Why do you think that story proliferates? Is it just because it's a good story and it casts Marilyn Monroe in a very favorable light? Not like she needed to be cast in a favorable light, but is that the reason why people want to make maybe more of a hero out of her than she would have already been?
Yeah, so I actually think that is a perfect explanation. There is very much Marilyn mythos that tries to raise her to a position she was never at, and I don't think Marilyn would recognize herself at all if she saw how people view her and talk about her. It's very loving, and there's a lot of adoration there, but it's just not true. And I think that's where I kind of butt heads with people in the community, because I look at these super positive stories that seem a little too good to be true. And of course, other people want to debunk the negative, which that should obviously happen too. But Marilyn has definitely been retooled into a 2023 icon versus, someone who was born in 1926 and died in 62.
I know one of the other stories that I continually see posted online, which is where a lot of this stuff comes from, is Marilyn was the first woman to have her own production company in Hollywood. I see that a lot.
That is another one that just makes the rounds, and Marilyn was much closer to the hundreds. Female production companies really had a boom in the silent era. And I think if you want to make a distinction between pre-studio silent era production companies, and then once the studio system comes in, late 1910s, that's fine. But there's always been female-owned production companies, even with the studio in power.
Do you happen to have the book handy?
I do have the book handy.
Just for fun, what was Marilyn Monroe doing on this day, January 22nd?
It's a serendipitous event because I picked up the book and it turned to January 22nd, 1959. So my book was more prepared than I am. But on this day, on January 22nd, 1959, Marilyn purchased $392.13 worth of shoes at Aliata Shoe Store. And she also purchased a Helene Arpels bag for $64.59 from the same store. So Marilyn went shopping today in 1959.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, is an example of the high level of minutia to be found in Marilyn Monroe, A Day in the Life. Boy, when you said that there was a lot in the archive, you weren't kidding.
Yes, there are thousands of pages of financial documents. There's checks, receipts, financial ledgers. Marilyn wasn't the best with her finances, so there were people constantly keeping track of what she spent.
I'd like to pivot, if I may, to this recent movie based on the life of Marilyn Monroe that got a lot of attention a few months ago, the movie Blonde.
Miss Monroe, it's time.
Marilyn Monroe only exists on the screen.
So just to back up a bit, I saw the James Bond movie No Time to Die when that came out, and I was really impressed with the actress Ana de Armas. I thought she was sensational in the movie. She's talented and funny and gorgeous, everything you could ever hope for in a movie star. And when I heard that she was going to be playing Marilyn Monroe in this movie Blonde, directed by Andrew Dominik, I was thrilled. I said, she could pull it off. She might not really resemble Marilyn Monroe, but they're going to do a great job, and she is just phenomenal. I was so looking forward to it. The movie comes out. It's released on Netflix first, and I think it had a small release in theaters. The reaction to it was so overwhelmingly negative, and some of it, to me, seemed way over the top. I mean, this film was a crime against humanity. I mean, some of the stuff was just outrageous. I hadn't seen it yet, but I had already developed a kind of reactionary response to all the negative publicity. I was thinking, it can't possibly be what they're saying it is. The Marilyn Monroe fan community, as we mentioned, they're so protective that I bet they went overboard in their dislike of the movie because there was something in it that they disagreed with. So I was almost preparing myself to love it and think this is the truth about Marilyn, this film. So I finally got around to watching it about a month ago, and it's just bad. There's no other word to describe it, really. I mean, it just fails on every level. I think Ana de Armas does well with the material that she's given. She's going to go on to be a movie star and do great movies, but this just isn't one of them. And it's just bad. I didn't know who I was watching after a while. I just felt like this isn't Marilyn Monroe. I don't know who this is.
So there's so much to unpack. It's kind of like where to begin. But I'm going to start and 100% agree with you that the Marilyn community jumps on anything that comes out about her, and they are just teeth are out and they want to rip it apart, and they jump the gun on a lot of things. But with Blonde, I agree with you. It is simply just a bad movie. I describe it as, I don't know if I can say that, but it's not super bad. No, it's very bloated, and it wants to really, buck against this 2020, at the time, 2022 ideal of Marilyn as a modern woman who was just stuck in the wrong time period. And I actually agree with that aspect. I think that's a good thing to do. I think that there needs to be more contextualization of her life and people realizing, this woman wasn't born yesterday. On the flip side, to do this, Andrew Dominik is just like, you know what? We're going to make the most just over-the-top film. We're going to have her nude 30% of the time, and we're going to have her sobbing.
Yeah.
So it's just a bunch of scenes, really, of this woman who is either nude or sobbing or being abused by somebody. And Joyce Carol Oates has come out in defense of this film, which I find very, very, I shouldn't say strange, because I'm sure she's obligated to do it, or she's proud of it, whatever it is. I'm not shocked that she's, I guess, supporting it. But just her whole narrative of, this is, feminist art, and Marilyn was such a victim, and Andrew Dominik captures that. And I'm like, no, that's not really how it's going. But the funny thing to me is, and I don't know if you've seen the original one, David, but this is actually the second adaptation of that book.
Yes, I didn't realize that until I watched it on Netflix, that there was this other film.
Yeah. So you're kind of stuck with these two films, and they have the exact same subject matter, and they treat it radically differently. Joyce Chopra, and I hope I'm remembering her name correctly, but I'm pretty sure I am, directed the first one. And she, uses the exact same source material, but she makes Marilyn much softer, and she's much more sympathetic in how she portrays Marilyn. And she doesn't make her a constant victim all the time of everything around her, like Andrew Dominik's film does. And it's just so funny to me to see Joyce Carol Oates go on about how Blonde is such a wonderful film. And I'm like, well, you have the 2001 adaptation, which, given is a TV movie, but it's so much better at portraying her as a real person who was somewhat three-dimensional. There's only so much you can do with Oates' source material. Versus Andrew Dominik's just very flat portrayal that, like you said, it's just a bad movie.
And, one of the strange things about Blonde is that at times it recreates these outfits or photographs that we've seen of Marilyn Monroe and does a really good job at it, but they're often in the wrong context or the wrong time period. That was a criticism leveled against the Elvis biopic, but to contrast those movies, and they both have their problems, and they both feature main characters who meet a tragic end, yet with the Elvis movie, you do walk out of, despite the sad ending, you walk out of that theater feeling uplifted by Elvis's music and the spirit of Elvis. With Blonde, it's just nothing but misery.
I totally get what you mean. It's funny you say this, because I recently started a YouTube channel, and I'm doing a video right now on biopics, and I've talked about both of these. Elvis, top-notch biopics. Like you said, there's issues with it, but I think if you're seasoned in the biopic watching game, you're not really looking for accuracy as much as you're looking for a similar vibe. But Blonde, I don't know, I just don't see anything of Marilyn in it. Like you said, they painstakingly recreate these outfits. They actually filmed in the house she died in. And then, like you said, but they'll put it, 1952, she's wearing her 1958 dress from a film.
Right.
Or they'll put her in, a Some Like It Hot dress when she's going in 1962. It was just, it was a very, very weird hodgepodge. I don't think you really leave the film feeling happy or uplifted or thinking, wow, I really know who she is, unless you went into the film thinking Marilyn Monroe was the world's biggest victim. And I watched this movie and it paints her as a victim, so she must have been the world's biggest victim. It's a very odd mix.
Well, getting back to the real Marilyn Monroe, where can people get your book, Marilyn Monroe, A Day in the Life by April-Vevea Chambers?
Hopefully it'll be on Amazon soon, but right now it is exclusively at Barnes & Noble. So barnesandnoble.com, and they can order it as well as in store.
And since we follow each other on Facebook, you'll know where I'm going with this. When are we going to get Brigitte Bardot, A Day in the Life?
Oh, my gosh. Brigitte is she is my person. I love her. For people, obviously, who don't know, because people can't see our friendship on Facebook, David is the only other person who gets Brigitte the way I do. And I am forever indebted to you. Because of you, I was able to get in contact with her, and I still have her letters and her autograph. So
Wonderful.
I have to thank you again for that.
Wonderful.
But I just sent her this letter, and I think I gave her, oh gosh, like $20 just to give to her animal charity. Like, I didn't want anything back from her. I just want her to read my letter. She sent me like a whole care package back. And she's like, here's some signed photos, and here's some stuff from, the Brigitte Bardot Foundation. And I'm like, I love you. I love you even more. And I know she's a very controversial person, but I love her. She's the nicest person.
And I know you have a real big interest in Betty Grable as well.
I do. I think Betty is she's so adorable. And it's funny because if you watch Betty's films and then you watch Marilyn's films, you can see how much Marilyn pulled from Betty for those, dumb blonde comedies. Even though Betty wasn't playing a dumb blonde, they both have, that kind of soft-spokenness, and they have some of the same movements. And there's a story with Betty that when Marilyn was first at the Fox lot, which would have been around 47, Betty caught her watching her one time and was just completely horrified. And she thought it was, very strange to have this young girl constantly going up and watching her on set. And I don't think Betty would quite be at the point where she would have pushed her off set, although it's not impossible. But Betty apparently was just like, oh, this girl's creepy. But I love stories like that because no one, wants to talk about that. But yes, I am Team Betty. If I had to watch a complete filmography between Marilyn or Betty, and I probably shouldn't say this thing I'm on here promote my book, but I would watch Betty.
All right. Well, again, I want to thank you so much for coming on. The book is Marilyn Monroe, A Day in the Life. Where can people go to catch up with you and all that you're doing?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram primarily, and you can find me there at Classic Hollywood Women. I am also on Facebook under the same name. And if people really want to see just my deranged postings and be my friend, they can go to Twitter, and it's under Classic Blondes with 2 S's for blonde.
As always, a great pleasure speaking with you. Beautiful blondes, kind of my favorite subject. So
that's what we connect on. That's our whole friendship right there.
True.
Beautiful blondes.
It is.